welcome to Rights and Recourse, a program that tackles constitutional legal issues, bringing you information and analysis. My name is Dumila Mateza. Remember, you can also be part of our discussion by tweeting us at Rights and Recourse. Alternatively, you can email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. I want to tell you it's been a weekend of political rallying this weekend. We have a by-election in Ngutu where the president was and the president of the IFP, and also in Rustenburg, the Moses Kotane Memorial Lecture is being delivered by the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa. And today here on Rights and Recourse, we are looking at issues around the ANC's policy documents. In a paper titled The Challenges of State Transformation in South Africa, Professor Robert Cameron of the University of Cape Town and Professor Chris Tapscott of the University of the Western Cape write and say, and I quote, "The advent of the multi-party democracy in April 1994 marked the end of 3 centuries of colonial conquest and white minority rule in South Africa. As part of the process, transformation which ensued from this event, the ANC-led government has set the reform of the public sector as one of its primary goals. The reform pursued have been aimed to restructure the new state in such a way as to make it more legitimate and accountable to the majority of South Africans, where the previous state had been authoritarian, repressive, and oligarchic in nature. The new state is intended to be democratic, developmental, and committed to a culture of human rights." Today on Rights and Recourse, we continue to analyze the policy documents of the ANC, and today the paper on legislation and governance. According to the ANC, this document is the articulation of the people's power through state institutions. To discuss today's topic, we are joined in the studio by the Honourable Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs and member of the Legislation and Governance Subcommittee of the ANC, Mr. Obed Mapila, and Mr. Lukhona Mnguni, independent analyst from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, but he's sitting with us here at the studio. Gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon.
Deputy Minister, first of all, let us find out what are the main issues contained in the policy document on governance and legislature?
Well, the main issues are the reform of the state, in particular the state architecture currently as it is, as to whether the powers that are within the state are well placed within the power itself. For example, when we look at the presidency, we will then realize that the presidency, whilst is the executive authority, then the powers are within the ministers. On the public service administration, for example, there's a minister for that particular portfolio. And the discussion document is proposing that that ministry ought to be in the presidency. And then it also proposes that the finance also ought to be in the presidency. And when you discuss policy, you are not discussing it in the context of now. We are then saying, going forward, 23 years into democracy, what is it that we have learned? What are the weaknesses in the system? And in order to strengthen the capacity and the capability of the state, then we ought then to look at that. In addition, obviously, the monitoring and evaluation, so that planning can then be centralized, and then so that we could then begin to respond in a systematic way and not in a disjuncture way where powers are all over. And then we could then begin to respond to the people's needs on the ground and indeed respond to what the people want.
Lukhona, you can join in here if you want to, because I just want to center this piece. Let's stay with this one. This was the way in which the Mbeki presidency ran. It was centralized. It was deciding who's going to be the premier, who's going to be the mayor, and all of that. Why this changed? And it was changed. Why are we going back to centralization?
Well, look, I mean, the current architecture that is still there is the same that functioned under Nelson Mandela, that functioned under Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlante's short stint. I think the idea now is we're having a very different discussion to the one you are talking about, where Mbeki was seen as appointing mayors and premiers and all of that. That is much more a Luthuli House problem in terms of how do you get about to propose names of premiers, names of mayors, and how does the party within its processes handle that? So you'd have people proposed, and then the NEC of the ANC would affirm particular candidates. But now we're talking about in the domain of the state, what should the presidency look like, and what should the powers of the presidency look like? Actually, when you read that document, you get this idea of we might be moving towards a super presidency. Because the idea of a cabinet, really, is that the president, he exercises his powers, but assisted by a collective of cabinet ministers. I think the real diagnosis that that document should have made is that the cabinet is too big for the president to actually be able to utilize cabinet to the most effective way we envisage. So if your cabinet is too big, you then say, oh, let us isolate the ministries that we think are more strategic. Let's bring them to the presidency. So you actually create cabinet within a cabinet. Let's
find out whether is that what the committee had in mind?
The committee obviously is just saying, let's re-look at the architect itself, because currently it's not delivering the optimal results. And
it's too cumbersome.
It's too cumbersome, and then also...
which responds to the question by Lukhona that it is too big.
Well, obviously the issue of this issue has been raised, and I think going forward we'll definitely have to look at the size of the cabinet. And then as we are already in another document saying even the number of the NEC members of the ANC in the cabinet ought to be limited so that the voice of the ANC then can grow, and then so that there can be critique towards what the government is doing. But currently, you look at the cabinet, it's dominated almost 90% or 80% by the NEC members. They are therefore the player and the referee at the same time. And the voice of the ANC is limited. And that is why we are also relooking at that organizational model.
And this is important because that same document talks about strengthening the administrative political interface, which is another thing that the ANC has been trying to contend with for the longest time. How do you make sure that the politics don't encroach in terms of proper functional administrative roles? At some point in local government, the Deputy Minister would know, we were looking at an issue of party officials not being able to be employed in municipalities as officials in the municipality, but he's raising a much more fundamental thing that has escaped public discourse, the idea that says the NEC ought to be the nerve center of political accountability for the ANC. But you find that who is it holding accountable? The same people that are in cabinet, the same people that are premiers. If you look at the National Working Committee of the ANC, I doubt any of them are not deployed to a very senior role within the state, whether it is in parliament, whether it is in cabinet, whether it is in the provinces. This creates a problem because, as he's saying, you become a referee and a player. So at the end of the day, when something goes wrong in cabinet, or we just quickly go take a resolution together in the National Working Committee as the party and insulate ourselves from criticism. And this weakens the party. So if you look at other jurisdictions, I mean, I know in Britain, you will find that the party leader is also, to an extent, the premier, the prime minister. But if you go to America, Democrat President Obama was just that. He was a state president, and he was in his immediate tasks, being president. And the Democratic Party was being run by someone else. And this creates a good system of checks and balances. But this is what the ANC has tried to move away from because they call it a two centers of power approach, which is probably something that they need to go back to and think very carefully. How does it assist us in building this political administrative interface that is good and accountable, vice versa, in between the two?
Lukhona has reminded me of something, Deputy Minister, and that is I've raised this issue before, and I'm not saying we should be following in their footsteps or we should be doing what the Americans are doing. I've raised this thing before and saying when people are appointed to the cabinet, those people must be interviewed by a committee in Parliament to see whether these people are able to do the work they have been entrusted to do.
Well, but the Constitution currently gives the powers to the President.
Unless
you are calling for the amendment of the Constitution.
No, what we're saying, the President can appoint, but the people must then be interviewed by a committee in Parliament to find out whether they know what they are supposed to be doing.
Well, currently there's no system that says they must be interviewed.
Yes, there's no system.
It doesn't exist. And therefore the President has the prerogative to appoint and to disappoint without even giving reasons to many occurrences. However, if there's a proposal, I know that is only one government in the continent, I'm not sure whether it's Uganda, where after the President has considered names, they will then go to Parliament to be interviewed. And then obviously there will be those that makes it, and obviously if they are not happy with it, they'll say to the President. But it's a model of the democracy that exists in that particular part of the world. But even South Africa, there's a call for that. Let's engage and discuss it. But currently, it's not part of the discussion in the ANC. But it does not mean democracy, by its nature, is static. It is an evolving process. At some point in the life of democracy, that might be a necessary issue that we ought to be incorporated.
Thank you very much. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion and call us on our telephone line, it will be on your screen. And also we will be, you can tweet us at Rights and Recourse. You can also send us an email and stay with us.
Do you support the calls made by Blade Nzimande and Solly Mapaila?
It is not a call by Comrade Solly Mapaila and Comrade Blade Nzimande. It is the position of the party.
Yes.
And the position of the party, we support it unambiguously.
Why?
The theory of the revolution, in simple terms, was that revolutionary forces are going to take charge of the state. And having taken charge of the state, they are going to transform the state to eventually transform society.
Join me, Mpotsedu, live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
Welcome back as we discuss the ANC policy document on governance and legislature. With me in the studio, the Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance and Cooperative
Governance and Traditional Affairs.
Traditional Affairs. Too long a title, I forget it.
Well, just say Copta if you just want to be shortened.
I'll stick to Copta. Look, I've always asked this question because I want to get somewhere. That's why I'm asking this question. Do we sometimes appreciate the fact that we are a constitutional democracy as another form of government? Let us say parliamentary democracy would be too ghastly to contemplate. In other words, if we have a parliamentary democracy, it's easy for government to say, okay, if this is what Lukhona does, we'll change the law.
Yeah, I mean, look, the idea of a constitutional democracy is exactly that. You try and move away from an arbitrary system that is susceptible to the politics of the day, because politics are very fluid. That is why politicians will tell you that there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. That is the epitome of fluidity of politics. So you then need something much more sacrosanct, something much more constant and consistent. The idea, of course, is to also have a rule of law that is respected and a rule of law that delivers but also improves. Now, the question in law is really always about trying to create systems of predictability. So in terms of if you commit a particular set of injustice, this is the type of remedial action that the laws will accompany that infringement. So the idea really to be a constitutional democracy is to create a governance framework where all of us have a point where we are accountable and we believe that that is the right place. And so far, that is the judiciary. But there seems to be hanging question marks these days.
We'll get there.
That says, because a constitutional democracy must still say Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and then we say the Constitutional Court is the highest arbiter on all matters constitutional. Now, once you put a question mark on that highest arbiter, then you are saying, must we relook, must we not, or why are we having these question marks?
We'll get there. The Deputy Minister will answer all of those questions. Deputy Minister, the policy document rightly states it takes an extract from the 53rd Mangaung National Conference, mainly that to deepen the national democratic revolution and accelerate service delivery and development. We need a stronger developmental state and a more integrated cooperative governance system. What is wrong with that? We always hear these things in all of the ANC conferences, and none of these things are ever implemented.
I don't know when you say they are never implemented, because there are resolutions, they are in the implementation is a process. And sometimes it goes through its own challenges and difficulties in the applications of it. And therefore, I will then say that we remain solid that we ought to achieve. And that is why it will then be repeated one conference to the other, because in our own evaluation and assessment, we have not yet achieved that particular goal. And it's a necessary goal, and that's why we're not abandoning it.
I say so, Deputy Minister, because what I've done, I've gone back to previous policy conferences, and I looked at those proposals for the policy conferences. They are similar to these ones, if are not the same.
Well, remember, policy in the ANC stays longer, and then there will then be what we call an assessment of those that we have implemented. And I think if you look at that page in the legislation governance, it will then tell you, here we had not achieved, and in here we have achieved. And I think we've got a table of those particular achievements and those that we have needed to. For example, when we talk of the number of the provinces that we need to have, we still have 9 provinces, and it's a long resolution, and we are not abandoning it.
By the way, one of your regions said we must do away with provinces, KwaZulu-Natal.
Well, obviously, they will be coming up as a response to the discussion document, making a firm proposal, and we'll hear if they can be able to persuade all other provinces and regions to say, let's go it as a popular view. But obviously, we say half for now. And I think that has been the proposal well accepted by everybody, is the implementation that has lagged behind. And that is why the policy says a presidential review ought to be set up so that we could then get men and women in the nation that can then begin to look at the issue and make recommendations.
There was another suggestion, which to me was a little bit absurd, that the Eastern Cape must merge with the Western Cape. That would make it too big a province. Probably the Western Cape could be merged with the Northern Cape. What's your view,
Look, the question around provinces is a long-standing one in South Africa. I think I actually agree with the region that says you must do away with provinces, and I'll tell you why. Because we've got a unitary government anyway, so provinces are a buffer. And the document is quite clear that it's become very difficult to articulate the responsibilities, the roles, and the extent to which those roles should extend to provinces. Whether you're looking at monitoring local government, because COCTA at the same time, at national level, it still has a vested interest in what happens in the municipalities. So some of the things, COCTA might, working with the province or overriding the province, have access to a municipality. So what is this role, what is this buffer zone of provinces? Now, if we were to say, let us remove the politics that we talk of as politics of patronage and whatever, and talk purely on the principle of provinces, one of the things the document raises is that there's been too much decentralization, which I do not necessarily think, I agree there's been too much decentralization. What the Kenyan government has been doing in the last 2 to 3 years, is to try and devolve powers from the national government to counties, much closer to people and where people are, so that people are able to say, if there's no responsiveness to this particular grievance, it is the county and not the national government that is happening. You would have seen in the 2016 local government elections when we spoke about how national issues infiltrate themselves to local government politics. Now, this is because really we have not come to an understanding what are the roles. I would say, preferably, you do away with the provinces and all that manpower, the know-how, the skill set of provinces, you disaggregate it to the various district municipalities. Because, for example, now you've got municipalities, when you say education and you go to a municipality, they say, no, that is not within our competence, and therefore we cannot necessarily intervene properly. But if these district municipalities actually had a desk that deals with education issues, that deals with health issues, and instead of a hospital in one district being under the guidance of the provincial Department of Health, it would be much closer in terms of where it is administered and in terms of where it functions. So I think there is a serious debate, and I don't necessarily think going for half of the provinces is the solution, as you are citing. If you put a Western Cape and an Eastern Cape, it becomes too big a province. If you put a Northern Cape, for example, a very big province but underpopulated, and another province becomes a big province. And of course now it lends us to this question, which has a demarcations issue at it. Do you want to change them this way because you want to change patterns of voting? Or do you want to change them for effective governance? What is the core issue? Maybe the Deputy Minister.
The Deputy Minister, can you answer that particular question? Is this a view to change voting patterns to place the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape together?
It has nothing to do with the voting patterns. It's more about effective governance and, in the main, service delivery to the people. And also you look at the funding. Where does the money go? Only 7% of the national fiscus, now they've just improved it by 2% to 9%, goes to a municipality. And where do people live? They live in a municipality, they sleep in a municipality, they work in a municipality. And in the province, then we'll then take a bulk amount of money, and then it gets bloated in the administration costs. paying salaries and so forth. And very little then goes down in terms of support. And I think the issue of the halving of the provinces was a measure just to say those who are for federal features in our system, because you remember it was a compromise. Yes. We are not just saying we don't care, but then let's then begin to reduce the bloated figure of 9 provinces to 4. And then later, then when we then begin to evolve power further, then let's evolve power closest to the people, because we say people's power. And the power must be closest to the people.
There's something else that was raised by the finance. My apologies, Minister, for interrupting you. There's something else that was raised by the FCC, the Financial Commission, saying we must do away with district municipalities because they are also a waste, a total waste in the system.
Well, for the rural provinces, it's not going to be an easy thing to just get rid of the district municipalities. Yes, maybe the number, because currently there are 44. We might then say, is the 44 bringing that particular objective? And we cannot get a poor cousin and another poor cousin and we think they will be wealthy. And I think that has been the challenge and the problem. And therefore, we'll then have to review the number of the districts, but also look at the pattern of growth and development currently in the country. I mean, development is even occurring in the rural areas. We take Skukuni, Jane Fairs, and then Beggarsford. Because of the mining in the Platinum Belt there, the areas are growing. So now we can then begin to say the district ought to be reorganized and re-engineered to then begin to look at that growth, and so that people can live a better life. Waterberg might then be another area, and so forth. But then we then look at Rustenburg. Do you say Rustenburg and Madibeng? Is it not about time that the two then comes together? Because the end from Platinum Belt, from just where Tshwane ends, going to Rustenburg and then beyond Rustenburg, it's a wealth point of one of Luan. And then therefore the areas, if they can be amalgamated and then not poor cousin and a poor cousin coming together in that environment. So we'll have to relook at that model. Then and Kota has started to look at it.
You might run into other problems, the demarcation problem that has beset Vuani.
Yeah, the demarcation problem, it's just going to be with us for some time, because South Africa is integrating one way or the other. And in the integration, I don't want to undermine national identities of the national various groups. We are not even going to be undermine the ancestral land that they had occupied even before colonialism. And Bantu stand came in and used them for whatever reasons. But these are heritage sites, ancestral areas, the areas that people have a bond with. But we are now integrating a society. Intermarriages is taking place in a bigger way. The mining is bringing people all over the country. I mean, you go to Limpopo now, you get Xhosa-speaking people in the bigger numbers now.
Well, somebody was telling me they are all over. If you'd like to join us in today's discussion, please, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498. But let's take this call from Victor in Polokwane. Victor, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yes, sir. What is your
input? Thanks for taking my call.
Yes, Victor.
We've got a problem. Let me start from the top.
Yes.
I lost respect with our constitutional code. They're like politicians also. I don't know exactly what's their job there. Because all this main opposition, with this small partnership, smaller opposition of Bantu Olomisa and Musiwa Kota, they're so poor. But they can afford to be taken anything right to the top court of this country. I don't know who's paying for their legal cost to start with. At the end of the day, our constitutional court, really, they have lost exactly what they are there for. Maybe they should go back to parliament. Or maybe let's close our parliament. Constitutional court supposed to be our parliament in this country, because we lost all this direction.
Victor,
himself.
Victor, wait a moment, Victor. I think we should do some education here. The Constitutional Court is there to interpret the Constitution. And it has become the eye and the ears of the umbrage of the people for people not to do things. I have a quotation that I wanted to use from Justice Mogoeng, where he says, certain values in the Constitution have been designated as foundational to our democracy. This, in turn, that is a pillar stones of this democracy. They must be observed scrupulously. Therefore, the Constitutional Court is doing that work. If things are not done correctly in Parliament and elsewhere, then the Constitutional Court is the final arbiter. In fact, all courts are final arbiters. I don't know whether you want to respond to what Victor was saying.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether Victor's problem is the ability of smaller parties to go to court and putting a suspicion on whether they get funding to do that, because it creates a particular narrative of they are being funded by third forces, there's a third force. But I think really the issue is what happens when the politics collapse in a country. And then this is the big question that will follow us for as long as matters that belong to the political sphere are actually taken to the courts. The issue that is before the Constitutional Court right now, for example, on the secret ballot, is a matter that belongs to Parliament. But as we have now learned from the oral discussions in Concord, is that it was once before Parliament that let's make an explicit rule that says the motion of no confidence must be voted on by secret ballot. And that did not pass in the Rules Committee. Now, you might be having the Concord, and this is not the case that is before the court, but this is like the secondary case that has emerged in my mind, that we probably are having a review on whether it was okay for Parliament or it was the most constitutionally compatible thing to do to say no secret ballot for the motion of no confidence. Of course, as you are saying to Victor, the court is there to interpret the law, and the interpretation of Rule 104.3 has been a matter that says, does the Speaker have a discretion to call for a secret ballot on a vote that is before the House? So that the Speaker was saying she does not believe she has the discretion, and some people are saying she has the discretion. Only the court can make an interpretation and give meaning to that. And we saw how Advocate Moerane sort of conceded to an extent that the Speaker actually does have discretion if you read Rule 104 subsection 3.
Thank you very much. I want to go to something else, but before we go there, let's go to a break. If you'd like to join us and call us in the same way as Victor was doing from Polokwane, please do call us on 714-5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse, or email it at rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
And poverty did not deter Mpumi's success.
Being an orphan or coming from poverty or having seen what HIV and AIDS does to a person that you love takes nothing away from you. It means that you are part of a selective few who have had to face a very, very marginalized struggle.
Abuse is a lonely journey that needs compassion.
I came across as a very confident, ambitious person, but behind that mask was somebody who had serious anxiety problems, a person who had knots in their stomach continuously, a person who could be in company and would feel very lonely.
Being away from his birth country did not stop his hunger to succeed.
Boxing was the way out. Turning professional would give me an income. That was the solution to the problems I've had for so many years.
For more inspiring stories, join Bupulong every Friday at 17:30.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 10:00 hours across all Central African regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. As we take this call from Jonas in Pretoria. Jonas, good afternoon and welcome to Rights and Recourse.
Afternoon, sir. My question actually.
Can you speak louder? We can't hear you. Can you raise your voice?
Okay, my question, I just want to ask Obed Papela some questions then.
Yes.
Obed Papela, I just want to find out about this thing. Why it seems to me that the presidency must be going to the Xhosas and the Zulus only. One. The second one is that the king, Goodwill Zwelithini, is getting more funds than other kings. Why it's like that? I just want to find out about that. Because King Zwelithini is getting preference than other kings. Why? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonas. Jonas, they're asking very pertinent questions. And Minister, I think he takes us, he's the Deputy Minister, he's taking us to the traditional leadership. There's a great deal of problem around the issue of traditional leadership. We have not heard the views why Kgosi Thobejane resigned from Parliament, stating frustration with the processes of Parliament.
Well, look, I mean, the Constitution does recognize traditional leaders, Chapter 12 of the Constitution. And it then further says their functions and responsibilities will then be articulated in law. And then that law is the Traditional Leaders Framework Act, which is under amendment currently to include the Khoisan, who were excluded as one of the indigenous communities in South Africa. Because in 1994, when we were looking at all other groups, they had existed, they were identified, but obviously they were identified under apartheid as you are a South African of a Zulu origin or South African of a Mopedi origin, whereas all colors were just classified as colors irrespective of them, some of them being Khoisans. So in 1994, therefore, only recognized the 9 indigenous groups. And now we are in the process of identifying the 10th, which is the Khoisans. And the law, therefore, looks at that. But also to empower some aspects of traditional leadership within what the Constitution says it is their role, the custodian leaders of our customs, traditions, and cultures. However, traditional leaders are not happy about that. They have raised an issue of the Constitution that the interim Constitution had given some powers, and then the current Constitution has completely moved away from those particular powers, and they want a review of the Constitution as to what happened with the powers that were there in the interim Constitution. So it's under discussion, that issue.
We'll stay with this topic. I wonder if you want to give an answer to Jonas' other question, asking why is King Zwelithini allocated more money than any other of the other kings?
Let me start with the presidential question as to why is it Zulus and Xhosas. You remember, parties choose leaders and across. So it is the parties that will emerge with leaders, and then those leaders then become the candidates or presidential candidates in any elections. And the voters then get mobilized or canvassed to vote based on the principles, obviously, on the goals and the vision as in the election manifestos. And then they will vote for that party, and the party will already indicate who is going to be the president. So therefore, the issue of whether Zulu, Xhosa, Venda or anything does not arise. Any person can be the president in South Africa, but the parties are the ones that then chooses, and the ANC has always been choosing the way it chose, and it will continue to choose in whatever way it feels befitting at the time. But on the issue of King Zwelithini of the Zulus, it was an inherited system. When you inherit a government, you inherit both liabilities and also whatever.
It was an inherited system from the old KwaZulu-Natal legislature.
Yes.
Which
had recognized and put the king where he is today. And when you come in as a government, you then therefore do not come in and then destroy. You then begin to say, those who are left behind, what is it that we can do to at least bring some kind of respect and dignity? But it took longer. And then that is why there's an outcry currently to say the differentiation on support of the kings is not the same. We may not take them to where King Zwelithini is. However, we need to give them some kind of comfort and some kind of stability so that we could then begin to be seen supporting the system.
Look on that system, to correct that system, the government under President Thabo Mbeki set up the Nhlapo Commission, which has to look at all traditional leadership. But this commission has been beset with problems. Its findings were called into question, and the credibility issues, and all of the kings who were not accommodated by that commission have actually won their cases in court.
Yeah, you see, yeah, the Commission has had numerous problems. Some of its findings have had to be re-looked at. But it's because we are having the wrong conversation. The right conversation, one, is to say, let us agree what would be the role of traditional leaders in a democratic South Africa, and have a real and democratic conversation around it. Now, the Deputy Minister says, you know, it's a custodianship role on traditions, customs, and cultures to an extent. But we also know, much to the admittance of the ANC discussion document, that traditional leaders also play an administrative role, especially where land is issued, land issue is concerned. If I go to my village now and I'm looking for land, I don't go to the municipality to buy that land. I go to Isbonda, who is mandated by the local chief or the local king to make sure that he administers those land questions. Now, that, of course, in the current time is still relevant because the reach of municipalities is still not as wall-to-wall as municipalities would love to. We do have a wall-to-wall system of local government.
Well, we have a wall-to-wall system of local administration. We have a wall-to-wall system of government according to the Constitution and the Act, but services do not get to where they are supposed to be getting.
Yeah.
And therefore, chiefs have to administer some of these services.
Yes, and there's still a great role that they play in that. And it has created a sense of stability in rural communities, especially, this role of traditional leaders. But the question is, in a democratic South Africa, for how long can that continue? For how long should some people continue to make state functions, really, because those are functions that belong to municipalities at the end of the day. That's within the jurisdiction of the municipality, because if you need water service there, electricity service there, those are part and parcel of the municipality's planning. And the problem now, while we talk about rural development, the traditional leaders, when they allocate land, I'm seeing now traditional leaders, if you drive in the Eastern Cape, allocating what used to be farm fields for communities. They are now allocating it for building. Grazing land is now being allocated for building. So which means there is not even a capacitation on spatial planning that has actually gone to sensitize traditional leaders to say a community ought to preserve certain areas. Just because people might not have money to plow to this season or in the seasons upcoming, it doesn't mean that part of the rural development strategy won't look at agri-parks. For example, KZN now is talking about agri-parks as the next wave of development. But where are these agri-parks going to be when the traditional leaders are allocating agricultural land as residential sites? So there is a discussion that we need about what is the limit of traditional leaders in governance. Because if you look at the Traditional Courts Bill, the highly contested Traditional Courts Bill that seems to be coming back again to Parliament, that bill even wants to see traditional leaders as dispensers of justice. And so the traditional courts, people within a jurisdiction, they are not allowed to go to a conventional court. They must come to the traditional court. Now, you can't have that in a democratic state. In a democratic state, each and every citizen must have an equal chance of the same type of justice and must have an equal chance of the same type of governance. And once you create a differentiated system, we are back at segregation, but of a special kind.
Well, let's give the minister, luckily it's the minister's portfolio. He deals with these issues day in and day out. Probably, Minister, if you can also tackle the issue of the Traditional Courts Bill. We got the Justice Department sacked when we discussed it. And we would like to get what Kokta is saying. And also this area, what is now happening to the Nhlapo Commission report? What should we expect there?
Let me start on the question of land. And I think we ought also to take that as a reality that the population of South Africa is grown. And the 13% of land which is under the traditional leaders, the custodian held in trust by the state, is overpopulated. So as a result, the population growth is now taking agricultural land. That is a fact and it's true. But it's...
Where is planning?
But the issue is that the conditions of the population growth is a factor. Secondly, the land, because it's in trust in the state, the traditional leaders, at most, they have to go and any development or agriculture still go there and say, I want to build shopping malls here. People have approached us, and then they must get permission. They also, on the agricultural land, obviously, which is lime barren currently, we have not really had proactive programs really to then respond to those particular issues, and land is just lime fallow. Currently, the rural development is supposed to be the supplier of food to the cities, and then it's not the system as we speak, except commercial farming that is taking place, forestry, agriculture, that is on the traditional land, and so forth. So I think it's a discussion that it's before the meeting between us as ANC and then Contralesa. There's the task team of 3, led by the Treasurer General of the Institute, Dr. Zweli Mkhize, myself, and Minister Mkwinti on the issues of land, as an NEC member, plus also Contralesa has 3 people. We have already gone to the Eastern Cape. We'll be going to Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KZN before the policy conference, because they are raising issues that have a policy implication. We are raising the very same question, the role of traditional leaders in a fast urbanizing South Africa. Because South Africa is 60% urbanized. It will be about 70% urbanized by 2050. And not that people they're dealing to the rural. They still build beautiful houses in the rural areas. But the government, in response to the needs of the people, is building townships also in the rural areas. Now, how do you then begin to see the system of traditional adherence where there are townships, establishments in a particular area? The issue is that we need then to begin to say, how do we then transform the system to then go with whatever has happened in Europe? In Britain, Netherlands, still have royalty existing in a particular way. We'd have to look at those models, and then because this is our heritage, we cannot get rid of it, we cannot do away with it, and they still have a role to play, as we say. In certain communities, they bring order, and then let's then begin to look at that, yeah.
Earlier, Deputy Minister, you spoke about state architecture, and I raised the issue several times. I raised it with Kgosi Tobejane when he resigned from power, and that is, what is the role of the National House of Traditional Leaders? Is it just a house that is in limbo because it has no legislative powers, it has no governance powers? What is its role?
Well, the role of the traditional is then to look at this mandate in the Constitution, as we speak, the current Constitution, beside what they are now proposing about certain powers that are in the interim Constitution, debating and discussing on those issues. But then the proposal in the policy of the ANC is what they are now saying, can we have representation in the National Council of Provinces, NCOP? So that
they want 30%, by the
issues, no, if there are issues that arises from the House, they must find a passage into the House that has the legislative authority. If there are any legislations that impacts on the rural populations and particular traditional communities, issues of land and the mineral resources currently, that people are given license, they come and mine, they are not even developing those particular areas. They want them to intervene in such laws that have an impact, but using their own house to debate and agree and then take those particular issues into the space of the National Council of Provinces. The way we have designed it for the SALGA, which is the South African Local Government Association, they have a standing order of participating in any committees to express their views and an articulation on how to shape municipalities. They also want to also have a similar articulation and influence on how to shape the role of traditional leaders.
Deputy Minister, that's a debate for another day, but let's come to something else that the policy document is talking about. Policy document says a great deal of things about state-owned enterprises. What actually is being said in the document about state-owned enterprises?
We are more concerned about governance.
First of all, let me start by saying I've been talking to a number of people here about state-owned enterprises, and I have a belief that if state-owned enterprises were run to the benefit of South Africans, in other words, they were run properly the way they should be run, they would be adding at least 1% to the economy.
Definitely. It's two issues. One is the governance issues, which has been bedeviling quite a number of state-owned enterprises. And we then say we need then to come up with a model that can really bring stability in that environment so that the boards operate in a way that is efficient, and then they are able then to know what is happening within the administration at all given times. But secondly, they need to be developmental and then support the developmental agenda of the country, where we are tackling poverty, inequality, and unemployment. How do they have to play that role? In the old, during apartheid, you remember how they used to have this training of the artisans. Today, they are no longer doing that.
I wanted to bring in that part. I am presently researching the history of the Afrikaner Broederbond.
Yeah.
And I read this history and I see how they transformed the issue of the poor whites after the Anglo-Boer War. And I'm saying, what stops us from doing something like this? And we have these state-owned enterprises, but unfortunately they are not doing what they are supposed to be doing.
That is the issue of the development agenda that is proposed in the policy, that we need them to begin to craft and come up with and say, this is now going to be your role. Yes, profit must be there so that we are self-sufficient, we are not relying on the national fiscus at all given time or bailouts. But at the same time, you need also to be seen as developmental in beginning to contribute to the well-being of our own people. Whether it's education, job creation, or any other, then let's then begin to see you also playing a role and contributing to the developmental agenda.
Lukona, I just want us to stay on this issue of the state-owned enterprises, and I am reminded here by a quote I used the other day. I had it here, I've taken it out, and I used another quote from Comrade Oliver Tambo, who says, the oppressor didn't do not everything that the oppressor did was wrong. And so we should learn from what the oppressor did, and it doesn't seem we have learned any lessons from the oppressors.
Well, I do not know.
Especially these issues of development.
Yeah, it's a very difficult one. I know a fellow in Financial Mail or in the Business Day once wrote an article actually that had to touch with what the Broederbond did and the sort of schemes to stimulate the economy that they came up with. In a time like this, when our economy is stagnant, the first port of call for government actually should be state-owned enterprises to stimulate the economy. I'm actually quite intrigued that much of the discussion that the ANC is having now is under this cloud of... They understand that we have stagnated in the economy, but there is no document that speaks to a short-term economic stimulus policy, because referring to the National Development Plan is wrong if we are not achieving the very growth that the NDP is predicated on of about 5.6% by 2020. So which means the NDP is going to fail, and we must have an honest debate and say the first debate is how do you stimulate the economy. But the problem with our SOEs, as it has been noted, of course, I mean, they've taken up a lot of government guarantees, the bailouts, so-called bailouts. So it's not the SOEs bailing out government, it's government continuously bailing out the SOEs.
Well, some of these SOEs, for instance, let's take a look at the Petro SA.
Yeah.
Petro SA registered a loss of about 14 billion rand. And then its mother company sold our
strategic reserves.
Our strategic reserves. What's going on, Minister?
Well, those are the challenges of governance that we want to bring stability and order in. But also, I mean, there are good state-owned enterprises that are doing, IDC, for example, Industrial Development Corporation. It has been able to loan money to the people that are really investing in strategic areas that they've identified, and it's doing well. So not all is lost, but we then say this developmental agenda, and I agree with you that even the stimulation of the economy, I think in the economic transformation document, there is a passage that then begins to also look at what is the role of the state-owned enterprises in the stimulation of the economy. It is there.
Yeah.
And then, but we are only looking at developmental agenda to deal with poverty, unemployment, inequality, but also the issues of the governance, which has been a problem and a challenge.
Talking about governance, I'm sorry, Lukona, talking about governance, I picked up this line. Somebody said this. I quoted this from a former chief executive of a public-owned enterprise, which says, I have, in the interest of good governance, decided to leave my employ from the 1st of January. I do so voluntarily.
Yes, now this is a governance question, right? And does it so voluntarily? And I think we all know who that is. No names mentioned.
Yes.
This issue of governance, the Deputy Minister will do well to be honest and say, underlying the chronic bad governance in some state-owned enterprises are the current politics of the day that have encroached themselves to the ANC, for worse, not for better, definitely, politics of patronage, where state-owned enterprises are seen as agencies to appoint, first and foremost, politically connected people to the boards who are not necessarily always fit for purpose. And I think the ANC is making a realization that we have not always appointed the best among ourselves to go into those boards. But even so, the executives of these SOEs have not been people that at all times advance good governance. I mean, when you have a state-owned enterprise like PRASA, for example, the audit result might be that, you know, okay, the books are well, but there's 13 billion rands of irregular expenditure that is going on here. Now, that is too big an amount to still keep the board intact for PRASA and pretend as if everything is going well and they are doing their fiduciary duties when they are actually overseeing an entity that has 13 billion irregular expenditure. So the connection between SOEs and politics is a real one. And I think one of the things we need to look at is how boards are appointed into SOEs and try and create a solidly independent mechanism of appointing board members of these SOEs so that they run and function in a way that would go for this developmental state. Because without good governance, there is no development of any kind.
If they do anything wrong, there should be consequences.
All the time, all the time.
Well, I want to take another point on this issue of corruption, because the document does talk about corruption a lot. And I've seen over the last couple of years, a former mayor of a city down in the Eastern Cape was sent to Parliament when the Hawks were investigating her.
Well, remember, there's this thing that you are innocent until proven guilty.
It should not count for Parliament.
And if there's no case pending in court at the same time, there are allegations that are just surrounding an individual. It makes life difficult in the political life of an organization.
But Minister, if those allegations...
But then if the people are before the court, obviously, the issue of step aside until your matter is resolved in court, and then if not guilty, then you can then begin to reconsider your bag. It's something else that the ANC has a firm resolution on.
Does this mean if a case is being investigated by the Hawks, we have no...
It's not yet a case in court.
It is not, but surely...
Is it not a political risk for the party?
Well, it could be a political risk for a party in terms of perceptions, definitely, because politics, if perceptions grows and then people believe in the perception, they will punish you at some point or the other. And then there are those particular risks. But then it also becomes difficult on an individual when allegations are just leveled. And then we hear you have been investigated, but there's nothing going. It goes for years on some individuals. Even the person you are referring to, he has been investigated for the past 3 years and nothing has come forth.
Well, we know that now that that case is on. Is likely to come before the courts very soon. Deputy Minister of Kokta and Lukhanya Mnguni. Thank you, Lukhona Mnguni. I always make this mistake. Lukhona Mnguni, thank you very much for your time. It's been a very good discussion. It's a pity there are so many other things that are discussed in the document. It's for all of us as citizens of South Africa to read this document so that we are able to follow the policy conference of the ANC. The president of the ANC, Reginald Oliver Tambo, once said, "Comrades, you might think it is very difficult to wage a liberation struggle. Wait until you are in power. I might be dead by then. At that stage, you will realize that it is actually more difficult to keep the power than to wage a liberation war. People will be expecting a lot of services from you. You will have to satisfy the various demands of the masses of our people. In the process, be prepared to learn from the other people's revolutions. Learn from the enemy also. The enemy is not necessarily doing everything wrongly. You may take his right tactics and use them to their advantage. At the same time, avoid repeating the enemy's mistake." This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 5 on Monday morning. The views expressed in this program are not necessarily those of the SABC. From all of us in the studio, thank you to the Minister and Lukhona, and from all of us, goodbye.